Appreciate that. Hopefully you guys can hear me in the back. Good deal. Thank you. So I'm going to tell you guys about the best day of my year, and I'm going to tell you guys about the worst day of my year in this talk. But I'm also going to talk about some of the fun times I've had. So this talk is a follow-on from last year. Last year I did a talk where I talked about counting things. If you have a login flow and you have usernames, you can count the times the user tries to log in. You can also count the number of passwords they try, the number of IP addresses that they come from, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things I highlighted last year was we had this customer at the company I used to work at that had somebody pinging their inventory APIs. They wanted to know, is this specific item available in this store right now? And they went through that a whole bunch of times, over and over and over again, looking at the same item, looking at the same store. What they were looking for was some mythical device called a hairdryer. I'm not sure what these things do, but apparently they're very expensive. And so they would find that the store had 2 or 3 of them hanging on a peg. They'd run into the store, they'd grab them, and they'd run out the store and put them on eBay. So we watched them do this a few times. We instrumented and we decided we're going to do a deceptive response on the next request and tell them there's 10 in the store, and then we're going to send the police to the store. And we did that. And the store, of course, didn't have 10. They didn't have any. They had, 1 hanging on the peg, and they ran in and grabbed it, and they went to run out, and the police were there, and they arrested them. This is one of the greatest successes I've had in my career because I stopped an actual criminal from performing an actual crime through API security, right? So for a guy that's been doing API security for 10 years, this is like the first time we won, right? So I thought, well, we need to bring more of these stories out so that people can see what's actually happening, and maybe that'll help people understand what's going on. So my name's Jason, and I've been doing API security for quite some time now. My wife was a web developer at a bank, and she came to me one day and said, Bob O'Neill has broken my web app. And I was like, where are we burying this MF, right? What do you mean? And she said, well, he's got an apostrophe in his name. And when he logs in, the app crashes, right? And I said, are you string concatenating a username and a password into a SQL query? No, I didn't. I didn't know any of that stuff, right? I was like a tick mark at a, what? So I asked ChatGPT to generate a white hat hacker who throws apostrophes at things. And you'll notice it didn't make apostrophes. It's weird. I've done a few responsible disclosures over the years. I broke into the Chamberlain garage door API, and I opened my garage, and I opened a friend of mine's garage, and I was a few lines of Python away from opening all of the garages when my wife reminded me that I'd probably end up in jail if I do that. So I didn't. I recently just changed jobs. I'm now a bot and fraud specialization SE at Traceable. I used to work for Sequence. I built the web scanner at Qualys. I've worked for vendors for quite some time. This conference is put together by some amazing people who volunteer their time to make it work, and some amazing vendors who will pay into this system and make it so we can all sit here and learn. Please visit the vendors. Also, if you're worried about asking, can I have one of these things that the vendors have? Let me explain how this works. They don't want to take them home. They don't want to deal with them. Take them home. Especially the whiskey ball guy over there, he's got a pile of stuff. So these volunteers, one day this year, sent me an email, and this is my favorite email to receive. Hey, can you come talk at LASCON this year? I obviously reply back yes, and immediately start thinking, what kind of crazy thing am I going to talk about? And that's really the best day of my year because I get to write whatever talk I want, and I try to make it something entertaining. So I've talked to a few of you at the conference, and many of you know, a week ago, I had an explosion in the basement of my house. House burned pretty badly. I lost basically all of my possessions. So being a homeless guy on stage feels pretty good at this point. I'm also pretty happy that I'm alive, because 40 seconds before this happened, I was down in the basement lighting the pilot light on my water tank. And that was the ignition source. And what ended up actually happening, if you can see in this photograph, this is my back door camera catching my back door blow out onto my patio. They blew a 12-foot wide by 8-foot tall section off the back of my house. And the only thing that saved my life is when they installed this door, they only used 8 nails. So I have a lot of friends that are in the military, and I turn to them at times of crisis like this, and I'm telling them this story, and I'm like, man, this thing blew up, and we had to get the dogs, and it was just a mess, and you can't even believe what happened, And my submarine friends go, but did you die? Thanks for the perspective, fellas. So anyway, I'm going to move on to talk about some thwarted API attacks. And the first example that I'm going to talk about isn't even on here. It happened to my son a couple of weeks ago. He called me and he's like, Dad, I'm getting all these fraud alerts on my bank account. And I looked at the alerts and stuff, and I looked at his transaction history because it's a shared account. And I saw somebody bought international Wi-Fi on Delta. He's not traveling anywhere. He's sitting in his dorm room, right? So let's break that down for a second. What were they trying to do? Does anybody have any idea why my son's skimmed debit card was buying Wi-Fi on Delta?
They're making sure it works before they do something bigger.
They were testing it. And what were they testing it against? An API endpoint that Delta has. You don't have to be sitting on their aircraft to buy the Wi-Fi for the flight. You can just interact with their endpoint. This is somebody using a public endpoint that's probably not meant to be a fraud test endpoint, but they're using it that way. So they bought the $35 Wi-Fi, and then it drained his account. My children, my wife, everybody in my family knows that if you're using a debit card, you never keep all the money in your checking account. You put it in your savings account, so that way you don't draw your account empty. And so they drew his account empty, they validated the card and said it's good, and then sold it. And then all the fraud started to try to roll in, but it all got declined because his bank account was empty, right? He'd have lost a lot of money that way. And I'm on TV now and then, and I tell people, don't keep your money in your checking account, and if you do keep your money in your checking account, don't use your debit card for anything. Right? And in fact, credit cards have good backstop protection against this kind of stuff. It's better to transact online with a credit card than it is with a debit card. So I'm going to talk a little bit about financial attacks. When you see graphics like this is my ChatGPT prompt for a bank aggregator. Nothing is spelled correctly on these, that's how you know. So what is banking aggregation? Well, banking aggregation is this really amazing concept. The biggest benefit is that you can log into all of your financial systems with one username and password. Did anybody just cringe a little bit? I do. So what ends up happening is if you graph out account takeover attempts at banks, they're not nearly as volumetric as the account takeover attempts at aggregators. And if they succeed at an aggregator, they get all of the banks, right? So aggregation fraud becomes one of these really huge problems. And so we've been tracking this for a while now, and we got to the point where when we see aggregation attacks happening, we can plot them back over to the banks and say this account has been under attack, right? You tie the two things together. But this requires the aggregator and the bank to be the customer of the vendor that's tracking this stuff, right? So it becomes really hard, but it's not really all of that hard. Kind of the way the attack works is you have a bunch of connected applications on the back end. So if you're a Yodlee customer, there's 17,000 financial institutions that connect to the back end through this API call that Yodlee will make. So I get a connected app, and basically I log into the aggregator, and then I log into every other facility that I'm a customer of, And suddenly we have this aggregation picture. So you can see that your 401k and your checking account have money in them at the same time. It's an interesting budgeting tool, for sure, but it also creates this huge problem. So the aggregators are causing this traffic flow that allows for people to use API endpoints at them in ways that you really wouldn't expect. And so we've been going through this trying to find, how do you win against this thing, right? How do you make sure that this doesn't succeed? Well, the first thing is good hygiene, right? The Yodlee key, the aggregation key, should expire, and it doesn't. And if you're building systems that build aggregation like this, you should understand that. The other part of it is, when somebody's going to do something, there should be multi-factor for that, and we don't often see that. A lot of times with aggregators, you can move data. You can say, move this money into this account, and they're two different financial institutions, and they don't require MFA for the transaction. And then when you start to look at this, you have to realize, if an aggregator is under attack load, they should be sending signal to all of the affected banks, but they don't do that. And it's one of those things where, when you get in front of a big group like this, you talk about how should it work. That's how it actually should work. So when we talk about how you win against aggregation attacks, it really comes down to simple hygiene and simple communication. But the communication part is something that we haven't done a good job with. There needs to be an API signal that says this account was compromised, so that way they can flush everything. It hasn't quite gotten there just yet. Anybody get the new iPhone 16? Anybody? Nobody? Yeah, it's a trend. They only sold 37 million of them, the poor bastards. Apparently that's down a lot. Yeah. So what kind of fraud can happen with this? Well, what happens when phone sales start to go down is the prices follow or the deals follow, right? And so there becomes this really great opportunity for arbitrage where somebody will say, you can have this phone for free if you trade your old one in. And they release a website that has an API endpoint where you type in a phone number and it tells you the value of the trade-in, or if you can trade that phone in, or whatever. So as you can imagine, it doesn't take very long to prompt ChatGPT to write you a Python script that's going to iterate through every single one of those phone numbers and allow for you to see which accounts you can exchange this on. So the is my phone eligible endpoint starts to really get a huge spike in traffic. And this is where we go back to my data science talk and talk about, should the request per second be this high at this time? Should these IP addresses be talking to me using just IP reputation scoring and simple things like that? But really the data pivot there is the IP address and the phone number. If you start to see a correlation between 50 phone numbers and one IP address, that's weird, right? And data science surfaces that nice and easy, right? Machine learning actually works in these kind of things. So how do you win against this kind of hype sale type stuff? Well, oftentimes when a bot is written, it is sort of in stasis in time. So if a new version of Chrome comes out, they don't often up-level the version of the user agents that come around. So oftentimes when you see bots, they're using old user agents, they're using IP addresses that come from places you would not expect them to come from. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the origin organization, right, no one at home is using AWS as the way they surf the web, right? So if the traffic's coming from AWS and it should be coming from a client, that's pretty easy to see. DigitalOcean has this problem, and I'll cover them here at the end. And then understanding the session that the user had. What did the user do, right? What was the first action that they did? What's the second action that they did? And does that fall into a scale with everybody else? The data pivots there are pretty simple. Initial traffic to the API endpoint, that's a bot, right? I mean, it's easy to find the automation. What you have to do is understand, what did they do first? What did they do second? What did they do third? Be able to track them through this thing. And you'll end up at a point where you can have some understanding into the traffic that's flowing through here. Hype sales are simple. I saw Tanya's here. She talked about being a Swiftie. Taylor Swift knows all about API transactions, right? She's quite well versed in them. But how did that work? How did that attack on Ticketmaster actually work? Well, somebody figured out that when you go to change your seats, there's an API endpoint for updating your seat request. They pounded on that thing by saying, I would like to change seat 1A to seat 1A through, 1D, 1F, whatever, and they just bought rows at a time, right? The bots just chewed through it buying rows at a time. You guys were clicking on the seats that you want, and the bots already bought the whole row. It's an interesting thing that they do. So the volumetric data that comes out of this is all of these attacks that go against that single endpoint. Pretty soon, the data science surfaces the endpoint to say, why is this thing getting so many updates? You don't normally update, right? But this is how PS5 works. This is how shoebotters work, right? They do an update in a cart. It's much faster than building the cart. I have a close friend, customer that's in Canada, oddly enough, and they have a quick service restaurant. And this organization sells gift cards. You can use a gift card at the store, you can use it online, all that kind of stuff. And they have a way to check what the balance is on the gift card through an API endpoint. So you go to the website, you type the card number in, any number, and it'll tell you if it's valid and if it has a balance. What an interesting endpoint to play with. So what ends up happening is I want to know what's the value of the card that I just made up. And I iterate through all the possible numbers to figure out what's happening inside of the checker. Oftentimes when you're looking at a gift card, it's like registered to an account, or it has a PIN number associated with it, or something like that. This organization didn't have any of that. They had an open endpoint that if you typed in a gift card number, it would tell you the balance. And so somebody wrote a bot that would ask for 2 different gift cards a day. Just remove the volume from it, right? And it removed the possibility of being detected because of a volumetric attack. It was a low and slow attack, but from the same IP address. And it used the same user agent. It wasn't a good bot, it was just a bot, right? And you don't have to be good if you win, right? So about $25,000 a month, this person was sucking out credit card or gift card values, right? Hey, what's this number worth? 0. What's this number worth? $25. All right. And they go off and they would buy things with it. So how did we find them, or how did we win against this thing? Well, we asked the organization to clean this up a little bit. Please put a pin or something on here. That basically chased the bot away, right? But my guess is they weren't doing anything else with this stuff. It's just like a card that was in your wallet. So make it tie to an account, right? I like the way Starbucks does it, right? They have a gift card associated with your app. You can reload the gift card. It makes it so that you can count your stars and all that stuff. But it makes it really hard for somebody to use my gift card because it's tied to my account. Or you can correlate it to something else, right? If you're a retailer and you're building an application that allows for gift cards, maybe make them mobile, right? And give them a GUID, right? It doesn't need to be a 16-digit number that starts with a 6, right? It can be kind of anything, and you get to decide that. So if you can correlate a GUID to a user account, you now have tied this up to the point where this kind of data extraction isn't going to happen, and you're not going to be able to use someone else's gift cards. How many of you guys are shoebotters? No shoebotter? Oh, we got one in the back. All right. So during the pandemic, when there was a lot of free money available and there was a lot of arbitrage that was happening around products, we were dealing with shoebotters. 16-year-old kid in their basement buying $200,000 to $300,000 worth of shoes a year, right? And then reselling them at twice the price. We've interviewed them, we've talked to a bunch of them, and this is how it works. And most of them have moved to rented platforms. There are platforms out there that will go build accounts for you in, whoever your favorite shoe store is. They will go build accounts for that store, and then when the invite for the drop happens, right, they have this nice tied-in way to get back to the store and do things. So what they're going to do is they're going to put a pair of socks into a cart, and then what they're going to do is figure out the update mechanism and update to the shoes that they care about and hit go. But you got to remember there's a lot to carry here. I've got to have good IP addresses or you're going to throw me off the platform. So I need residential IPs. You know those free VPNs that you can get? They make residential IPs available to everybody because you join a proxy network when you use those VPNs. So as part of the proxy network, you got your IP addresses sorted out. I can figure out the user agents that I need to use, I can figure out all of the stuff that I need, but then what happens? Once I've purchased it, once you've purchased anything, what happens? Well, you start tracking that thing, right? When's it coming to my house? As soon as that thing drops into your email that says it's going to be shipped to you, you're over there hitting that track this thing button. Well, a customer called me and said, this is kind of weird, but we're seeing all this traffic on our FedEx lookup, right? So you got to remember, if you start pounding on FedEx with just tracking number after tracking number after tracking number, you're going to get banned, right? But if a third-party reseller does it, that's their job, right? I don't know if you've noticed now, when you buy things online, the email you get looks the same as the other place that you bought something online. It's very similar, and the buttons are the same. It's because there's a third-party company that does all that, right? And they're the ones that are actually doing the tracking lookup when you hit that button, so they look like a bot. So you can run a bot against them because they always look like a bot to FedEx, right? And FedEx doesn't care. So this shoe botter went out and bought a whole crapload of shoes, and then they were running a script to see what the status was. And they were being shipped to a place that they had to use, I don't know if you've done this, but FedEx takes it to your post office, then the post office puts it in your mailbox, right? Or whatever. They were using one of those, so the track was incomplete. And they had gotten the shoes right after the sale. But for 90 days, they were banging on this endpoint going, where are my shoes? Where are my shoes? Where are my shoes? And because they did that, we figured out how they were doing the ShoeBot purchase and blocked them from all future purchases. So it makes it so that you can see this stuff very easily. The ML was surfacing it going, why is someone constantly asking this? It's the same numbers forever, right? And so same number submitted over and over, bunch of IP addresses that they were having to rip through, trying to ask for that same tracking number. They didn't have a concept of it's done, like you got them, right, in their script, so it was kind of incomplete. Like I said, they don't have to be good at this if they win, right? They have to be good the next time they fail. So I spent some time looking at data aggregators and what financial aggregators can do to you, but what happens on the back end of banks, right? When you initiate a transfer from bank to bank, or if you initiate an international wire to send money somewhere else internationally, you're joining an API collection called the OFX network. OFX is its own protocol, but it's basically HTTPS with a little better cert. And it's a bunch of API endpoints that are out there. One of the challenges that you have with this is some banks will allow anyone to initiate an international wire. Now, if you're a platform engineer, if you're writing an application and someone comes to you and says, I need the regular user to be able to log in over here and then do an international wire over here, what's going to happen is somebody's going to realize you need to be an admin on OFX, right, in order to make this work. So they'll just pass you off as the admin, right? And if you can understand the control on the back side of this thing, then you can do things like move, add, change, deletes, initiate, right? And if you're an admin, you can initiate off of someone else's account and transfer money. And what we were finding was fraud on the OFX channel that came from someone would log into their bank account and they realize that now I'm the admin on the OFX channel, right? No consideration for reader account or anything like that. No consideration for pipe this somewhere else and have somebody else validate this transaction. Anyone could initiate changes. This was on the backside of a huge financial platform. Somebody had figured it out and started siphoning money out of there, and they got about $3 million from small transactions, $500, $700 transactions they changed and routed to themselves. It was the volume that turned them up. We saw them, doing too many transactions. The thing about greed is greed feeds greed. So, as you get $2,000, you want $20,000, and pretty soon you're really scraping away and somebody finds you. Eventually enough complaints will roll in, right? So when you build a system like this, if you need somebody to be able to initiate something, don't make them the admin, right? Don't pass that token from one to the other and just assume everything's okay. You need to understand the roles for the follow-on channel that you're going to drop this in. And if you want to avoid making sure that they're not the admin, this is how you're going to do it, right? Look at how the authentication channels for that service actually work and use them rather than passing a role in, especially one that's important like admin. Credential stuffing still exists, and I showed you guys account takeover attempts for aggregators. And what a lot of people will say is, well, I can fix credential stuffing. I'll just throw a CAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA or Arcos Labs Fun CAPTCHA or something like that in front of here to make it work. How many of you guys, when you're in your mobile app, suddenly it stops and asks you how many traffic lights are there? APIs don't work this way, right? So oftentimes you can't break an API's credential stuffing attempt by using CAPTCHAs or reCAPTCHAs because they're hidden, right? But also, on the 27th of September, Ars Technica wrote this article. They're at 100% accuracy using AI to find all the traffic lights. How many of you have been able to 100% of the time find all the traffic lights? I think this is signal. I think we can use this against them. The byline in this is I welcome the traffic light overlords. Because if you can pick up all the traffic lights or all of the motorcycles or all of this, this one has crossings, school buses. Oh, I've never been 100% on this, so how can they be? We've seen a credential stuffing attack just a few weeks ago. It was 5 million requests in 25 minutes. It was super easy to identify. We could see the username because that's passed in the clear. We could see the IP address, right? Nice and simple. You can correlate usernames to IP addresses. And we had hashes of passwords. So if I know that Bob is trying to log in from 27 different countries using 35 different passwords, something's up with Bob, right? Plus, if I look at all those IP addresses and I look at all of those user agents and start doing data pivots on all of it, I understand all of the other accounts that are affected as well. So being able to get in the middle of this and sort of win here means more than just asking somebody, where are all the traffic lights? What you need to be able to do is look at the transactions on how they're coming in. What is it coming in through your login endpoints? Is it actually doing anything good here? And then IP reputation scoring. I have blocked more API attacks just by looking at the IP addresses that they come from than anything else. User agents are a great signal. They're good, but a lot of times if you're using a mobile app, you've named your mobile app something and they're using that user agent. So sometimes it's not as great. But IP addresses, just simply understanding that somebody's coming from AWS surfing your website, that's weird, right? Or they're coming from a Colombian colo facility, right? Or something like that. So once you really understand what's there, it makes it easy to just say, I need to throw this traffic away. And counts. When I talked about, last time when I talked about counting things, just simply counting login attempts right now, right? It's 2 in the morning, East Coast time. We don't normally get a lot of traffic then. I have that customer in Canada that has a quick service restaurant. They're only open from 11 in the morning to 2 in the morning or something like that. So traffic anytime that comes outside of those hours is obviously weird, right? There's something up with it. All right. Imagine, if you will, this is my ChatGPT version of a server made out of droplets. Imagine, if you will, you have, I don't know, a whole pile of credit cards that you want to see if they're good. Or if you want to attempt to log into something a billion times, or anything that you're going to need a server for, you have to realize that people aren't going to stand up a big EC2 instance and start adding, GPUs into it and stuff. They're going to go look for the cheap free servers, right? Whether that's attack your servers and get on them, or they're going to look for sales and things like that. So there's a organization that their servers are called droplets, and when you go to rent them, you get a couple of free hours with a new account. So what we saw was a bunch of these kind of accounts. If you look at the email there, it's kfjjdushjd@gmail.com. It's weird, it's not a user-friendly email, it's not something you can read, right? But also remember, I can start dropping periods anywhere in there, and most systems are going to recognize this as a new email address, right? Unless you're sitting in there stripping periods and looking at the actual, before the @ part, right? ecfzds@gmail. Again, we can throw periods through there. We can combine these two. So those are weird accounts that are showing up. For this organization, it was 62 fraudulent accounts were signing up from 6 different IP addresses, 3 different countries, 2 accounts each 7 days. So they'd stand the server up, they'd run a process of credit cards to check them, and then they'd shut the server down, and they wouldn't come back, right? And then somebody else would create an account, and then they would run this kind of stuff, and over and over and over again, you'd end up with these kinds of things. So how do you put this kind of thing down? Well, registered users and email addresses are pretty simple, right? You can look at them and say, let's do a verification on this email, so ping it, right? Bots have trouble reading their email, right? They have to do a bunch of different things to make that work. So if you can verify the email address, just as an initial thing, you're going to put down a little bit of this, right? The next thing is the content of the email address. Numbers are okay. There's a lot of people that are, Bob 1974, right? Those are things that are real, but the ones that I showed you on the screen, they don't look anything like all that, right? They look completely different. And so you have to look at the email addresses and understand, sort of, are they good or bad? And then look at the user accounts that are being created around this stuff. Are they long-term accounts, right? Or are they short-term accounts? I called I called my bank the other day, and they said, thank you for being a customer for 32 years, right? And I'm like, how can that be? I'm only 27, Apparently I'm not. But understand that if this is an old account that does a lot of things, yeah, grant them, right? But if this is brand new, don't do it this way. And what I think is probably happening is these organizations advertise, hey, come and get, a free amount of server time, and then somebody just realizes, well, I can use that as much as I want, and they iterate through it. But follow the user through the app. Know what it is that they're doing, right? I met the head of security for the organization that I'm talking about, and he said, yeah, I'm the place everybody validates their credit cards from, right? He knows that this is happening. So we sit in line with it, and we watch it occur. They sign up for an account. Once they have the account, they log in almost as fast as the account registration email hits their inbox, they're on, right? They run the stuff, and they're done. It's as fast as you can imagine it go, right? They don't do anything, I think, hands-on. They've got automation that's doing all of this. So follow them through the app and see the patterns in the automation, right? That becomes signal eventually, and it allows for you to understand, sort of what's happening out there. Data science is really how we're going to have to do this. When we move to APIs, we lose all the signal from the client. There's no JavaScript, there's no what did you do with your cursor on the screen, there's no things that you can really dig up out of this except for the user behavior on the backside, right? Understanding how they move through your environment and understanding the places where they're going to surface something that allows for you to say, aha, that's a bad transaction. And then track that backwards to figure out where the other bad transactions actually exist. I've been working in this industry now for many years, and did that not come out? And what I've learned is bad actors are going to do the same things every time. They're lazy, and remember what I said, they don't have to be good if they win. Right? So they can be lazy, they can be bad, right? They can do a lot of weird things, especially if they're winning. If you can step into the middle of that, understand the data that's coming along with those transactions, just like HD talked about today, identifiers can give you more than just their identification, right? You can understand the VIN number of a car breaks apart into the year it was made, the color that it is, the kind of model that it is, and then it's one of a million, right? That same kind of stuff happens in API transactions. I see your username, I see your password. That username doesn't use that user agent usually. That IP address is from Vietnam, right? Like these are the kinds of things that allow for us to pivot the data and understand what is happening to us and what's out there. Machine learning surfaces this really easily and allows for you to point at it and say, that's a bad transaction, let's not allow that to happen. Now, how do you do this on the fly? Well, you have to be implemented in Nginx, or you've got to be somewhere where you can actually stop this traffic, or you need to have the capability of bingo markering this traffic. I work for a lot of banks. Banks don't throw traffic away. They don't like to do it. They don't want to do it. They want to go look at it a second time to make sure that it should be thrown away. So what we do with a lot of organizations is we just simply set a header that makes their fraud system pick it up, right? You don't have to throw the traffic away, you can let it through. In hype sales, though, you want to throw the traffic away. Otherwise, the volume is so high, you've got to spin up a billion servers, right? You've got to make up crazy IP addresses so you can get free DigitalOcean, right? In order to make this work. So I had ChatGPT talk about all of the things that you can do with data science. Most of these words are spelled correctly. But what I mean out of this is data science is going to help you understand things much more easily than picking through your web logs, right? It used to be that when a web server got attacked, you could literally just take the logs and scroll them and go, there it is, right? And there'd be a block of the same text repeating itself as it went by. Well, it's not really like that anymore, but sort of it is, right? It's happening on a transaction by transaction basis, and you're able to surface these things with machine learning models that allow you to understand these data pivots are off, right? Now, when I say machine learning, what I actually mean is Bayesian analytics, right? These two things occurred, and they don't normally occur this way. These two things occurred, and they do normally occur this way. That's really all we're doing, right? But what are the two things? You can set up what those two things are over and over and over again and have it combine the stuff together and say, yeah, this looks bad. All right, so I asked for a little bit of grace because of my current situation with the house and stuff. I'm going to let you guys go a little bit early unless you have questions, but also it's lunchtime, and I just, I can hear the knives and forks clinking, and I know you guys are hungry. Thanks for being in here with me. Thanks to the crew for putting all this together. Thanks for the vendors. You guys have been great.